Hey everyone, this is Christian again with another episode of Sent. And today we're going to focus on just a slightly different topic and start a new series on autism. Too often, autistic people feel on the outs at many churches. And so we want to talk about how it's important to create a safe environment in our churches to reach people with autism for Christ and disciple and love and care. So today I'm with Yisrael Vincent, and I'll have him introduce what he does here in Phoenix to you, and we're going to dive into conversations on evangelism, discipleship, and autism, because all people matter to God. Amen?
Amen. Hey, that's awesome, Pastor Christian. I'm Israel, and I work here at the Arizona Ministry Network, and we are with essentially an organization that helps equip pastors and ministries around the state of Arizona. But my slice of the pie is I am the men's director for Arizona, and that's where I have a chance to meet Pastor. And I also am the director of our school of ministry, so it's a school that trains up ministers around the state. We have about 300 students, and helping to prepare them essentially for the ministry and what does it look like to pastor and have these groups and things like that. So there's a little bit of crossover that I've learned in this scenario as a dad.
You're also doing some at GCU.
Yeah, I'm a professor at GCU, so I'm in their seminary theology department, so that's my terminal degree is in that. And so love theology, love reading. I'm a teacher by nature, and I've kind of served in different capacities. So this kind of journey has been for me a theological journey, a spiritual journey, a ministry journey, a parenting journey, as a man, development, and so it's touched just about every area of our lives.
So if you wouldn't mind, take us back to the beginning, because no one knows what's going to happen when you have a child. So tell us your journey.
Yeah, great question. So just to give a little bit of context, so I have two children. I have a 21-month-old son, and then I have a 7-year-old daughter. And our 7-year-old daughter is our autistic child. So we talk about like neurodivergence is sometimes a word that these were all new terminology for us when we started, but we just had our final diagnosis less than a year ago. So, but the discovery process started very early on for us, and kind of recognizing at a really early age, okay, my child is maybe operating differently than other children their age, and navigating that, and first-time parents, and so part of that's just like, okay, maybe it's just a type of child, you're getting advice, you're getting discipled from people that are ahead of you, and once we started kindergarten, we recognized, and just through a series of kind of a hard season, honestly, of kind of figuring out that maybe there was some things happening that were beyond the norm for an individual, and so navigating that with teachers and instructors and pastors and things like that. And as a parent, nobody wants to have the word disorder spoken over their kid, right? So I was very hesitant when people initially started coming to us, and I remember we had an educator say, and my daughter was at the time maybe like 3 or 4, she says, I think your daughter, she reminds me of some of the autistic kids that I have in class. And I was pretty offended by that. And, because I was like, what do you mean? Like, why would you even say that about my kid? And so there was a journey, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, of, for me at least, and my wife would maybe articulate this a bit differently, of hesitance and avoidance. And so it was a long journey, but there was a couple of instances as we started more formal classroom settings through school that were, I don't have to go into too much detail, but essentially what could be described as a little bit traumatic. Your kid's getting sent home, you're having issues that you're recognizing, like when you're sitting down with administration, they're saying, hey, this is different than the normal capacity of what we're dealing with children. And then on top of that, autism presents differently a little bit in males and females, and so we can talk about the spectrum side of it and there's some important distinctions in that. But we essentially got onto this pipeline of discovering some resourcing, and also the limitations that come into that. The system is pretty broken, so even to get the evaluation, most parents are waiting around. For us, it was over a year to be on that list to get the diagnostic. So for an entire year, you're going through questions, navigating things emotionally, and things like that. So for context, my daughter, in autism, they talk about 3 different levels: first, second, and third. And that describes the level of, I wouldn't say impairment, but some of the needs, the type of assistance that they need. So my daughter is very high functioning, is maybe language they would use. She's very articulate. She's gifted intellectually, and so that's a component to it. She has autism, they call it level 1, but so very articulate, very normal in a lot of sense to use that word, but if you met her, you would probably be like, oh, okay, this is a normal 7-year-old, but autism really has to deal with like rigidity and change, sensory issues and things, sometimes being able to handle emotional outbursts and things like that. It's just, there's a lot happening in the brain, and so some of these things can come as a surprise and can be pretty dramatic in nature. And so, but that's different than when someone says they have autism. Sometimes I always thought like nonverbal, right? I always thought maybe that's so there was a learning curve along the way of us not only getting the resources, but also understanding the community beyond that. So that's kind of a big background picture.
Yeah, and that's good to know. And from my own experience as a minister, I've seen churches excel and fail when it comes to the parents and also the children with autism. And what was your experience at the start when it came to the church?
So one of the things that we noticed, and I'm a minister myself, I'm an ordained minister, and my wife and I have both pastored in different seasons of our lives. And in this season, I'm working more as a parachurch ministry, so we attend churches, we spend a lot of time speaking at churches, traveling, so we're in a lot of different ministry contexts. And we try to do that as a family. And so for us personally, one of the things that we noticed was as we started going down this path for us and getting a little bit more clarity and things like that, was that a lot of churches who aren't necessarily equipped, this isn't bad.
It's a definite topic we need to talk through.
Yeah, but there was about almost a year period where we just physically couldn't get through a service because of the way the kids ministry was structured, and for that setting of the church, it was a larger church at the time, very established, so you have a kids ministry that's in a service, feels like 70 or 80. They have a stage, they've got lights, they've got loud things, they've got games and things like that. For us, as she transitioned into that, was very overwhelming, very for kids with sensory issues, sometimes lights, sounds, feelings of textures and things like that can be extremely dysregulating. And so we couldn't get through service, and we just thought maybe it was like maybe we just got to coach up on this, and so we were sometimes just sitting in the car, not able to go into the building, and trying to navigate that. And so you get there and trying to figure out, okay, what's wrong, or having maybe really strong dysregulation. And I'm using this almost like as a sanitized term, but for us in the moment, like sometimes extremely dysregulated situations, and you're carrying your kid out, and they're so dysregulated, they're hitting, they're punching, they're screaming, and you're, as a parent, navigating this in a foyer full of people, and so there's embarrassment, there's shame, there's confusion, there's so many things that go into it. You have people, and this is a projection outwardly that you feel as a parent, is that everybody's looking at you, everybody's trying to expecting you to get your kid in order, because especially as they're younger, can seem like, oh, you're just not disciplining enough. And I had several people sit down with me that were close to me and said, I guarantee you, if you just disciplined harder, she would grow out of this. And I was, part of me was like, look, if it was that easy to fix, we would have done that first, right? You're seeing a small glimpse of our life. You don't understand even just the energy it takes to get here, let alone to discipline and navigate a situation that you think would essentially be like throwing gasoline onto a fire if I handled it the way that they said to. So that's kind of the background of just churches not having an understanding of it, not being equipped, and not being even in order to have the conversation with the family. And because that's a different dialogue, rather than, hey, we need to discipline your child more, of, hey, maybe it's more of, hey, tell me about your child. What's going on? Is there something going on? And every autistic kid is different.
Yes.
So they all need different things that one kid might have that might be a trigger, might be totally fine for another. So it's not one size fits all.
And I think that's the important topic for churches to discuss, is how can we have a better impact? Because I've heard stories, and that's why I was interested in doing this conversation with you and others, of churches having parents take their kid away because they're just unwilling to adjust and make these changes. So that leads to this next question. What could a church a starting point to help them reach out to parents with kids or teenagers with autism?
Honestly, one of the easiest things I would say for churches, and this is something I don't really see in our churches, and that's not a fault for anything, but an outward communication. So for us in this season of my life, like kids ministry is already the most important ministry in the church. Anytime I visit a church, I know how to feed myself. My wife and I are both established, but the kids ministry, everything rides or die on if I'm going to stick at a church, because if the kids ministry is no good, I can't trust my kids there, then I'm not going to go there. So that's just with any parent. I feel like that's kind of across the board. But for us, when we're looking to visit a church and deciding, hey, can we bring our whole family to this service? If I'm speaking somewhere or traveling or things like that, I'm scoping out the website to get a feel for, are they equipped to maybe handle this? What's their kids ministry like? Is there something about their kids pastor? Can I even get in contact with them before? So in my role, I have a formal relationship with a lot of our churches, so I can look up their information. It's not, even if it's not on the website, call them and things like that. But for a lot of parents, they're looking to see, is this a place that I could come? And sometimes it's hard to have that conversation and maybe give context when you're in a new building, you're trying to check your kid, and you're trying to figure out where the classrooms are, and then trying to find the kids pastor and have a serious conversation in the midst of all this stuff. So having the ability to maybe on the front end contact the kids pastor and be like, hey, we're planning on visiting your church this weekend. My child maybe has some sensory needs or things like that. Are you guys equipped to handle that, or what can I expect so I can onboard? Because a big part of it for autistic kids is expectation. They're very rigid in some of their routines, and if you change that, it can be detrimental. So sometimes even having a new leader once you are established at a church on a Sunday can be disorienting. But to be able to say, hey, can you give me an onboard so I can coach on the way there what to expect? So I can say, hey, we're going to go to this new church today. We're going to go in. They're going to have a donut for you when you get in. I want to introduce you to Miss Haley. She's their kids pastor. She's super nice. She's going to let us come early. And so we're actually at a church right now that the wife of the pastor is actually a special ed's teacher and at a high level and trains. And they have a school for autism renting the building. So they're uniquely equipped in this. And so when we started talking with them, they said, hey, come early. We'll come when there's no kids. We'll give a tour. We'll let you meet some of the people. And for us, that was very trust building. For not just us as parents, but for my daughter, to be able to get to know, and that, again, that may not be ubiquitous for every kid, but for us, that allowed us to at least see everything, know what to expect, and have the freedom and the margin to not feel the pressure. Like, okay, we have 3 minutes to try to download all of like the do's and don'ts with our kid. So,
and now that has a place that she's adjusting to, what have you seen in her that has allowed her to enjoy and to thrive in that environment? Is there anything that you've noticed that has been useful that other churches could use?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it is because of the compassion, because of the communication, but I love that when we left that church, we visited it, my daughter said, this is our church. And she runs in, and at first, sometimes with kids with autism, they don't want to be touched. They might be a little bit aloof for a while, and they're kind of filling you out. And but now, after building some of that trust, that's a huge thing in our home. She'll run up to the kids pastor or run up to the pastor of the church and give a hug, and is excited to be there. And she'll sit with us in worship. There's someone that does sign language at our church in the front, and she really loves that and caught onto it. So she will learn all the things that they're doing, copy it, and at the end tell me, Dad, this word means this and this means Lord. And so for her, it's like a very sweet, like as I'm watching my kid worship, I'm watching her be excited to go to church, say things like, I love my church. And that doesn't mean every single Sunday is perfect. And so even having good structures, kids just have bad days in general, right? So that doesn't mean, so we've had to navigate that too. Having one bad Sunday doesn't negate all of the work and the progress that we've made, and even with the staff and volunteers, because you may be dealing with the children's pastor, but then they have a team of volunteers that are all cycling, and sometimes there's a little bit of onboarding that needs to happen with those to kind of know and say, hey, so that everyone's on the same page. Because if you get someone in that situation that doesn't know the background and they just think they're working with a child that has is neurodivergent in some way, they might handle a situation in a way that causes more damage than good. And I don't fault them for that when that happens. I know it's a training thing, but we try to be in this communication as much as possible. So you're not doing things like holding down a child that doesn't want to be restricted, or walking them in a room, or the whole gambit. And not only for our family, but we've seen there's a whole community of families that just don't come to things at churches because they're not equipped for it. So they end up doing church at home, they do it homeschooling, and there's kind of a loneliness to it. So being able to have that parents talk. So as soon as we find a space that's safe, we're talking to all of our other families with neurodivergent kids, and like, hey, this is a safe place to bring them. This is a good spot, and they're craving that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What kind of tools do you have at home to have a calming space that could be a good thing for churches to possibly use?
Oh man, this is super helpful. So, so we've learned a ton along the way, and we're not experts by any means. And every month and year is different because we're also raising a child and figuring out her personality and just her normal development. So what we did months ago is different than So, but a big part of it is I think having safe places. So we're super intentional in our home about creating spaces that are quiet when they need to be quiet. We have a dog that for us is very therapeutic to my daughter. Animals are like, she's like the animal whisperer. And so autistic kids will have like these superpowers, learning is huge for her. So sensory exercises, so a lot of like sensory bins. We've done everything from Play-Doh to squishies to noise canceling headphones, so there's, when you start to get it, like if you just search sensory on Amazon, there's a lot more resourcing in this area now. So churches, so one of the first things that when we started coming, the children's pastor there was so incredible. She literally brought out an entire bucket of sensory toys that they had bought off Amazon and just put it on the table, sat in the chair, and for the first couple of weeks, that's all they did. And we're in a small church. That's also a very positive thing for in this season. We're just not in a place that and there's nothing wrong with the mega church setting. My wife and I both have been in those settings, but 100 kids would be overwhelming beyond what we could do. But a classroom with 2, 3, sometimes under 10 children is much more approachable sensory wise. But they just sat down and did sensory toys and things like that, and didn't push too hard, and trained up some of the volunteers. Because as a volunteer, you want to come up to a child and be like, you want to come in hot and strong, and hey, we're happy to have you. And sometimes for an autistic children or someone with ADHD or is neurodivergent, that is very, whoa, you're in my space, you're coming, I will come to you, don't come to me. And you can feel as a volunteer a little bit of, oh, that kid doesn't like me, but I promise you, if you just give the space, they're gonna come, or you let them enter your space, don't enter their world.
Well, I'm finding the same thing with adults with autism have that same space where they need to communicate, hey, I need 10 feet.
Yeah.
And so I think it's good to allow that, and sometimes we forget that as Christians. We think sometimes a little less bubble. I always think it's funny, in Italy they have no bubbles. They do greet each other with a holy kiss.
Yes.
But sometimes as Americans we think, oh, we've got to give a hug or a handshake immediately, but sometimes we need to learn to read people. And that's a process we as churches need to do, is read not only people but kids, teenagers, and be able to meet them where they're at. And I think it's great to have these discussions and see these possible changes, not only in the classroom setting but the church setting, so that all people are welcomed in. Israel, thank you for this. This has been a pleasure, and I'll be praying for your ministry and for not only your daughter but your whole family, that you continue to grow closer and closer to the Lord. Thank you so much.
Hey, Pastor Christian, thank you so much, and thank you for making resources like this. It's something that I think is going to be a blessing to a lot of families, and as they're navigating different things. So.
Well, and I think the church needs to be on the front end instead of the back end.
Yes. Sometimes
I think we wait too much. We see the issue and we wait for specialists to tell us outside of the Christian community, and I think it's good for us to be on the front end and go, hey, how can we do better to reach more people for Christ?
One last thing, I was a super helpful resource for us that someone recommended was there is it's called trust-based relational intervention. And when we first got down that road and a diagnosis and trying to figure out, we were searching everything to figure out how to deal with this at a level that's therapeutic. And someone, it's by Dr. Purvis. She's a Christian. I think she might have passed away, but it's out of Texas. university, but it's actually a therapy that's mostly for foster kids. At least it was presented that way. But it's The Connected Parent and The Connected Child are two of her books. That it's and she's a psychologist and everything like that. But it's a method of developing relationship and trust with kids that have been through trauma, or what we have found it also works really well with neurodivergent kids. But it teaches you elements of building trust, recognizing signs of distress when they're, sometimes if they don't always know their body cues, so like they don't know they're hungry, so an explosion might be tied to something like that. They have really good scripts, so like things that when a child is dysregulated that can help them get, like, you don't want to overwhelm them with information, so really short phrases. Like for us at our home, especially early on, eye contact is a big part of, so let me see your eyes, and that helped to kind of like get me as a script that allowed us to kind of hone in on a situation and get kind of on track. Or can you say that it wants more with respect, or that was an inappropriate response. And so really short things, but it gave us kind of a playbook and allowed us, so it's Connected Parent, Connected Child. Those are two resources that for us.
That's awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
again.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.